The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Hospital hummed their familiar tune as Emily Carter pushed through the double doors of the emergency wing, her feet aching in worn sneakers that had seen one too many 12-hour shifts. The clock on the wall read 9:47 in the evening, which meant she had been standing, running, consoling, and saving for nearly 13 hours straight. Her scrubs, once a cheerful shade of navy blue, now bore the invisible weight of the day, coffee stains mapping out her fatigue like continents on a weary atlas. She barely heard the chatter of her colleagues gathering near the nurses' station. Someone laughed, the sound bright and careless, and Emily felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't envy, exactly. It was more like the ghost of a life she might have lived if circumstances had been different. If her mother hadn't gotten sick 3 years ago, if her younger sister wasn't struggling through college on a shoestring budget, if Emily herself hadn't decided that everyone else's needs came before her own. Emily had been a nurse for 6 years now, ever since graduating at 22, with loans that still haunted her bank statements. She'd chosen nursing because she wanted to help people, because her grandmother had been a nurse and told stories that made healing sound like magic. What her grandmother hadn't mentioned was the bone-deep exhaustion, the way your back screamed after 12 hours on your feet, how you'd learned to eat lunch in 4-minute increments between emergencies, or the peculiar guilt that came with being too tired to feel compassion for the 100th patient of the day. But Emily was good at her job, exceptional even. Her supervisor had told her multiple times that she had a gift for making patients feel safe, for remembering small details that mattered. Mrs. Patterson in 307 liked her coffee with 2 sugars and a story about Emily's day. Mr. Chen in the ICU needed someone to hold his hand during dialysis because his daughter lived 3 states away. Emily remembered all of it, cataloged every preference and fear and hope, because if she couldn't control anything else in her life, at least she could control this. The problem was that somewhere along the way, Emily had forgotten to save any energy for herself. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where sirens were the lullaby that sang her to sleep. Her furniture was a mismatched collection from thrift stores and sidewalk finds. Her refrigerator contained yogurt that was probably expired, half a loaf of bread, and the kind of determination that manifested as willful ignorance about sell-by dates. Every 2 weeks, Emily's paycheck arrived and disappeared just as quickly. $400 to her mother's medical bills, $300 to help her sister with rent and textbooks, $200 for her own rent, which was only that cheap because she'd agreed to live in a building where the heat worked sporadically and the walls were so thin she could hear her neighbor's entire life. What remained went to groceries, bus fare, and the slowly accumulating credit card debt she tried very hard not to think about. She told herself it was temporary, that once her mother's treatment was finished, once her sister graduated, once she got that promotion her supervisor kept hinting at, everything would get easier. But temporary had stretched from months into years, and Emily was beginning to suspect that this was just what life looked like. An endless cycle of giving until there was nothing left. "You coming to the gala, Em?" Sarah, one of the younger nurses, called out, her voice bubbling with excitement. The hospital's annual fundraising gala was the event of the season, a chance for staff to dress up, let loose, and forget for one evening that they spent their days elbow-deep in human suffering. Emily forced a smile, the kind she had perfected over years of pretending everything was fine. "I don't think so. I've got things to take care of." "Come on," Sarah pressed, walking over with that determined look Emily had come to dread. "You never go out. When was the last time you did something for yourself?" The answer to that question was so long ago that Emily couldn't quite remember. She thought maybe it was 2 years back, before her mother's diagnosis, when she'd bought herself a paperback novel at a used bookstore. Even that felt like an extravagance now. 2 other nurses had joined them now, Jennifer and Alicia, both wearing the kind of casual interest that made Emily's stomach tighten. She knew how this looked. Emily Carter, 28 years old, no social life, no boyfriend. Wearing the same rotation of clearance rack clothes, she'd become the cautionary tale people whispered about in break rooms, Don't end up like Emily. Don't let yourself disappear. I don't have anything to wear," Emily said finally, her voice dropping so low it was almost a whisper. It was the truth, raw and humiliating. Her closet contained exactly 3 outfits: her work scrubs, a pair of jeans with a sweater for errands, and one cheap dress she'd worn to every event for the past 5 years, until it had faded to a color that couldn't quite remember what it used to be. The zipper was broken. She'd fixed it with a safety pin that poked her back every time she moved. Sarah's face softened with something that looked dangerously close to pity, and Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm sure you could borrow." "It's fine," Emily cut her off, gathering her bag with more force than necessary. "Really, you guys have fun." She didn't wait for a response, just turned and walked toward the staff exit, her vision blurring slightly at the edges. It wasn't the dress, not really. It was everything the dress represented. A life where she could afford to think about herself. Where she could be more than just a caretaker, a provider, a ghost moving through her own existence. Behind her, she heard Alicia's voice. "Not quite quiet enough. Sad. Isn't it? She's so young, but she's just given up." Emily walked faster, her worn sneakers squeaking against the linoleum, and told herself she didn't care what they thought. She told herself a lot of things lately that weren't quite true. What Emily didn't know was that someone had been watching this entire exchange from the doorway of the pediatric wing. Daniel Mitchell stood perfectly still, his tailored charcoal suit a stark contrast to the clinical surroundings. His daughter's small hand tucked safely in his own. He had brought Lily in for her routine checkup, a quarterly ritual since the accident that had claimed his wife's life 5 years ago and left their daughter with a heart condition that required constant monitoring. Daniel was 34 years old, though most days he felt ancient. He had built Mitchell Technologies from nothing more than an idea and a laptop in his garage, had turned it into a software company valued at just over $800 million, and had absolutely no idea how to fill the crushing emptiness that lived in his chest like a permanent resident. People called him successful. They called him driven, brilliant, the kind of self-made story that business magazines loved to profile. They didn't know that he hadn't laughed, really laughed, since the day he buried his wife. They didn't know that he went through the motions of living with mechanical precision, checking boxes, fulfilling obligations, raising his daughter with the kind of careful attention one might give to a fragile artifact. His office had a view of the entire city. His house had 7 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, and felt emptier than a mausoleum. He drove a car that cost more than most people's houses, and felt nothing when he started the engine. Success, he'd learned, was just another word for elaborate distraction. The day his wife Rachel died, Daniel had been in a board meeting, arguing about quarterly projections and market share. She'd been driving home from her sister's place in Connecticut, singing along to the radio probably, thinking about dinner, about picking up Lily from daycare, about ordinary things that ordinary people thought about. The call came at 2:47 in the afternoon. Black ice. The car had slid into oncoming traffic. She'd died instantly, they told him, as if that information might somehow make it hurt less. Daniel had thrown himself into work after that, building his company into something bigger and more successful than he'd ever imagined, because if he stayed busy enough, maybe he wouldn't have to feel anything. He was good at being busy. He was terrible at being present. Lily had 3 nannies in 2 years before he finally found Margaret, a kind woman in her 60s who didn't flinch at his emotional unavailability and loved Lily as if she were her own granddaughter. But lately, something had been shifting. Lily was 7 now, old enough to ask questions like, "Why don't you smile anymore, Daddy? And don't you get lonely?" Old enough to look at him with her mother's blue eyes and see straight through every defense he'd constructed. His therapist, whom he visited monthly out of obligation rather than belief, had suggested he needed to open himself to the possibility of connection again. Daniel had nodded and promptly ignored the advice. Until now. Until he'd stood in this hospital hallway and watched a woman in rumpled scrubs walk away from her colleagues with her shoulders hunched against invisible blows, and felt something crack in the fortress he'd built around himself. "Daddy, that's Miss Emily," Lily whispered, tugging on his hand. At 7 years old, Lily had her mother's gentle spirit and an unsettling ability to see straight through people's carefully constructed walls. Daniel looked at the nurse walking away, and something in his chest shifted. He had noticed her before, of course. It was impossible not to. Emily was the nurse who always took extra time with Lily, who explained procedures in a soft voice that never talked down, who remembered small details like Lily's favorite color and her fear of needles. She had kind eyes, the color of warm honey, and she wore her exhaustion like a badge she was ashamed to display. "She's sad," Lily said with the matter-of-fact clarity children possess before the world teaches them to pretend. "Yes," Daniel agreed, though he hadn't realized he'd noticed until his daughter pointed it out. "I think she is. Can we make her happy?" Daniel looked down at his daughter, at her wide blue eyes so much like her mother's, and felt the walls crack a little more. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. Mommy would want us to try," Lily said with the kind of certainty that made Daniel's throat tight. "She told me people are supposed to help each other. Before she went to heaven." "I remember." Daniel squeezed his daughter's hand, marveling not for the first time at her capacity for emotional wisdom that far exceeded her years. Maybe she was right. Maybe Rachel would have wanted him to notice the sad nurse with the kind eyes. Maybe she would have wanted him to do something other than just survive. "Okay," he said softly. "Let's think about how we might help." Lily's face lit up with the first real smile he'd seen in days. "I have ideas, Daddy. Lots of ideas." 3 days later, Daniel found himself standing in front of the hospital's administrative office, holding a cup of coffee he didn't particularly want, and feeling more nervous than he had in years. He'd built a company worth millions, negotiated deals that would make lesser men sweat, stood in front of investors, and pitched ideas with unwavering confidence. But the thought of approaching Emily Carter made his palms damp and his heart race in a way that felt both foreign and oddly familiar. He had a plan, of sorts. It was probably a terrible plan. Lily had helped him with it over breakfast that morning, her small face serious as she drew pictures of what happiness might look like. Her final conclusion: "You should ask Miss Emily on a date, Daddy. Then, she won't be sad anymore." The logic was childlike and innocent, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that maybe his 7-year-old daughter understood something about life that he'd forgotten in his years of grief. That sometimes the answer to pain wasn't more walls, but rather the terrifying act of reaching out to someone else who understood what it meant to hurt. He'd done his homework. Called the hospital director, whom he knew from charity functions, and casually asked about Emily. The director had spoken highly of her, mentioned she'd been passed over for a promotion twice because she refused to work fewer hours, said she was the kind of nurse who made the hospital better just by being there. Daniel had also noticed that Emily always looked tired, that her scrubs were clean but worn, that she brought lunch in a paper bag and ate quickly, mechanically, like someone who'd forgotten that food could be enjoyed. Emily was just finishing her shift when Daniel approached. She looked up from her paperwork, surprise flickering across her features. "Mr. Mitchell. Is everything okay? Is Lily?" "She's fine," Daniel said quickly, realizing with a start how his unexpected presence might alarm her. "At home with the nanny. Everything's good. Her checkup went well, by the way. Dr. Patterson said her heart sounds strong." Emily nodded, but confusion remained in her eyes. She waited, patient and professional, and Daniel suddenly forgot every carefully rehearsed line he'd practiced in the mirror that morning. "I heard you," he said finally, the words coming out wrong, too abrupt. "The other day. About the dress. About not having. I mean, I wasn't eavesdropping intentionally. I was just there with Lily, and I heard." Emily's face flushed deep red, and she looked down at her hands. I'd really rather not talk about it, Mr. Mitchell." "Daniel," he corrected automatically. "And I know this is awkward. I'm doing this badly. Doing what badly? Daniel took a breath, feeling like he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't quite see. I haven't been on a date since my wife died. 5 years. And I don't know if I'm ready, or if I'll ever be ready. But I thought maybe, would you consider being my first date? After all this time? The words hung in the air between them, vulnerable and strange. Emily looked up sharply, her eyes wide with disbelief. Around them, the hospital continued its endless rhythm, but in this small pocket of space, time seemed to pause. Is this? Are you serious? Completely, Daniel said, and he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. I'd like to take you to dinner. Somewhere nice. And before you say you don't have anything to wear, please let me help with that. Not because I think you need help, but because I want this to be special. For both of us. Emily shook her head slowly, her expression a complicated mix of longing and self-protection. I can't accept that. I don't even know you. It's too much. Then let's change that. Daniel said softly. Let's get to know each other. One evening. Just dinner. If it's terrible, we never have to speak of it again. But if it's not, he left the sentence unfinished, a question mark hanging in the possibility of something neither of them had dared to hope for. Emily bit her lip, a gesture of uncertainty that made her look younger than her 28 years. Daniel could see the war playing out behind her eyes, pride wrestling with a loneliness that probably matched his own. She opened her mouth to refuse. He could see it forming, and he found himself speaking again before she could. Lily asked me to do this, he said. Which wasn't entirely true, but wasn't entirely false either. She said you were sad and maybe I could make you happy. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd tried to make anyone happy, including myself. You seemed like maybe you understood what it felt like to give up on yourself. Something in Emily's expression shifted at that. A flash of recognition that told Daniel he'd struck close to something true. Why me? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The question was so honest, so raw, that Daniel felt his carefully maintained emotional distance slip another notch. Because my daughter thinks you're wonderful. Because you're kind to strangers when you're exhausted. Because when I look at you, I see someone who gives everything to everyone else and nothing to herself. And that makes me want to give something back. And because I'm tired of being alone, I'm tired of going through the motions. I'm tired of pretending that I'm fine when I'm not. And maybe you are too. A long moment passed. Somewhere in the hospital, a machine beeped steadily. A door closed. Someone laughed in a distant hallway. Emily looked at Daniel, really looked at him, and saw past the expensive suit to the man underneath, who was just as scared and scarred as she was. Okay, Emily whispered, so quietly Daniel almost missed it. One dinner. The smile that broke across Daniel's face was the first genuine expression of joy he'd allowed himself in 5 years. And he didn't even realize it was happening until Emily smiled back, tentative and cautious, like someone testing whether ice would hold their weight. Saturday? Daniel asked. 7 o'clock? I'll pick you up. I'll need your address, he added. Then caught himself. If you're comfortable sharing it, I can meet you somewhere, if you'd prefer. Emily hesitated, then reached for a prescription pad and scribbled down her address. The building number made Daniel's heart hurt a little. He knew that neighborhood, knew what it meant that she lived there, but he took the paper and tucked it carefully into his pocket like it was something precious. Thank you, he said. For saying yes. For taking a chance on someone who's probably forgotten how to do this. We'll figure it out together, Emily said. And something about the way she said together made Daniel feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't quite as alone as he'd thought. 2 days before their planned dinner, Emily came home from her shift to find a package sitting outside her apartment door. She stared at the elegant box, as if it might contain something dangerous. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried it inside, setting it on her thrift store coffee table and just looking at it for a full 5 minutes before working up the courage to open it. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper so delicate it seemed to whisper, was a dress that made Emily's breath catch in her throat. It was the color of deep midnight blue, simple in design but exquisite in execution. The kind of dress that would make anyone wearing it feel like they mattered. The fabric felt like water between her fingers, cool and impossibly soft. There were shoes, too, elegant heels in a shade that complemented the dress perfectly, and they were exactly her size. There was no card, no note, just the dress and shoes, and a small velvet box that contained earrings, simple sapphires that caught the light like tiny stars. She should return it. That was her first thought. She couldn't accept something like this from someone she barely knew. It was too much, too generous, too everything. This outfit probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. It was excessive and inappropriate, and she should absolutely send it back immediately. But when she tried the dress on, standing in front of the cracked mirror in her bedroom that she'd been meaning to replace for 2 years, Emily barely recognized herself. The dress fit like it had been made for her, hugging curves she'd forgotten she had, making her skin glow in a way that her usual exhaustion never allowed. She looked like someone who belonged in nice restaurants, someone who deserved good things, someone who wasn't just surviving but actually living. Tears pricked at her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. When was the last time someone had done something kind for her? Not because they needed something in return, but simply because they wanted to. She couldn't remember. Couldn't remember the last time anyone had looked at her and thought she deserved beauty, deserved care, deserved to feel special, even for one evening. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You don't have to wear it if you don't want to. But I thought you should have options. I hope I got the size right. Daniel." Emily found herself smiling, despite the tightness in her chest. She typed back, "How did you get my number?" The response came quickly, "Hospital directory." "I'm very resourceful when motivated." "And my address?" Same answer. "Should I apologize for being mildly stalkerish?" "Mildly," Emily replied, and then added, "Thank you. For the dress. It's beautiful. I'm glad. I had help. Lily insisted on the color. Said it would match your eyes. She's 7, and apparently more stylistically aware than I am." Emily laughed, a real laugh that felt strange and wonderful in her small apartment. "Tell her she has excellent taste." "I will. See you Saturday at 7. And Emily? Don't overthink this. Just let yourself have one nice evening. You've earned it." Emily set down her phone and looked at herself in the mirror again. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, someone confident and put together, someone who went on dates with successful men and didn't count pennies before buying groceries. But underneath the dress, it was still her. Still Emily Carter, the girl who couldn't save enough to matter, who wore herself down to nothing for people who'd never know her name, who'd forgotten what it felt like to want something just for herself. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe she could let herself have this. Just one evening. Just one night where she got to pretend that life could be more than endless obligation and exhaustion. What was the harm in that? Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn evening that made the world feel full of possibility. Emily spent 2 hours getting ready, which felt simultaneously indulgent and terrifying. She took a long shower, something she usually rushed through. She did her makeup carefully, using techniques she'd almost forgotten. She put on the dress and shoes and earrings, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw someone she barely recognized but desperately wanted to be. Daniel arrived exactly at 7, because of course he did. He knocked, rather than buzzing from downstairs, which meant he'd gotten past the broken intercom system somehow. When Emily opened the door, they both paused, just looking at each other. Daniel wore a dark suit that probably cost more than Emily's car, if she'd owned a car, and he'd clearly put thought into his appearance. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw cleanly shaven, but it was his eyes that caught Emily's attention. They were green, she noticed for the first time, a deep forest green, and they were looking at her like she was something remarkable. "You look beautiful," Daniel said, and the way he said it made Emily believe him. "Thank you," she managed. "You look very nice too." "Very nice," Daniel repeated with a small smile. "I'll take it. Ready?" Emily grabbed her purse, a cheap thing that looked ridiculous next to the elegant dress. But Daniel didn't seem to notice. He offered his arm, old-fashioned and sweet, and Emily took it, feeling the solid warmth of him through the expensive fabric of his suit. The car waiting downstairs was not what Emily expected. It was nice but not ostentatious, a dark sedan that probably cost a fortune but didn't scream about it. Daniel opened the door for her, made sure she was settled before closing it gently and walking around to the driver's side. "I thought you'd have a driver," Emily said as he started the engine. "I do. For work. But tonight felt like something I should do myself. Is that okay?" "It's perfect," Emily said, and meant it. They drove through the city toward a restaurant, whose name Emily had only ever heard in whispers, the kind of place where reservations required weeks of notice and prices weren't listed on menus. The city lights blurred past the window, and Emily felt like she was in some kind of dream, beautiful and fragile. The kind of dream where you're terrified to move too quickly because you might wake up. Daniel must have sensed her discomfort, because he reached across and gently touched her hand where it rested on her lap. "You look terrified." "I am," Emily admitted, because lying seemed pointless. "I don't belong here. In this car, going to that restaurant, wearing this dress. This isn't my life." "Neither do I," Daniel said, and something in his voice made Emily look at him. "I know what people see when they look at me. Successful businessman, wealthy, put together. But the truth is, I've been going through the motions for 5 years. Working, taking care of Lily. Existing. Not living. Just existing. Going to places like this because that's what successful people do, not because it means anything." His honesty was disarming, and Emily felt some of her tension ease. They drove in comfortable silence for a few more minutes before Emily asked, "What happened to your wife? If you don't mind talking about it." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the steering wheel. "Car accident. Black ice on the highway, coming back from her sister's place. She was driving home, probably singing along to the radio. She loved to sing. Couldn't carry a tune to save her life, but she loved it anyway." He smiled at the memory, small and painful, gone in an instant. Lily was only 2. Too young to remember much. Sometimes I think that's a mercy. Sometimes I think it's the cruelest thing of all. "I'm so sorry," Emily said softly. "I shut down after that," Daniel continued, and Emily could hear the cost of these words in his voice. "Just turned off everything that felt dangerous. Love. Hope. Any kind of vulnerability. I thought I was protecting myself. Protecting Lily. But I think I was just hiding. Hiding from everything that made life worth living, because I was terrified of losing something again." Emily squeezed his hand, a gesture of understanding. "My dad left when I was 12. She found herself saying. Words she rarely spoke aloud. Just walked out one day and never came back. Mom never really recovered. She got depressed, started drinking, then got sick. And I became the one who held everything together. My sister, the bills, everything. I was 15 and I was running a household. Sometimes I'm so tired, I can't remember what it feels like to want something just for myself. It's like I forgot how." They looked at each other across the car, 2 people who had learned to carry impossible weights, and something passed between them that was deeper than attraction, more fundamental than chemistry. Recognition, the understanding that comes when one survivor sees another and realizes they're not quite as alone as they thought. The restaurant was everything Emily had imagined and more. Soft lighting, pristine white tablecloths, waiters who moved like dancers, and prices that would have made her panic if she'd been the one paying. Daniel requested a quiet corner table, and they were led to a spot that felt intimate and safe, tucked away from the other diners. The waiter brought wine neither of them had ordered, but Daniel didn't correct him. "If you don't like it, we'll get something else," he said. No pressure to drink it just because it's expensive, but Emily tried it and found it was smoother than any wine she'd ever tasted, warming her from the inside in a pleasant way that made her shoulders finally relax. They ordered food, and then they talked, really talked, in a way Emily couldn't remember doing with anyone in years. Daniel told stories about Lily that made Emily laugh, the sound bubbling up from somewhere she thought had gone dry. How Lily insisted on wearing tutus to the grocery store, how she'd declared at school that her father was sad but trying, and the teacher had called Daniel in for a concerned conference, how she collected rocks and named each one, and had full conversations with them when she thought no one was listening. Emily talked about her patience, the small victories and heartbreaking losses. The elderly man who'd learned to walk again after a stroke and hugged her so tight she couldn't breathe. The little girl with leukemia who drew Emily pictures of rainbows. The way holding someone's hand while they died felt like both the most important and most helpless thing she'd ever done. "Why did you really ask me out?" Emily asked as dessert arrived. A chocolate confection that looked too beautiful to eat. Daniel considered the question seriously, setting down his fork and looking at her with those deep green eyes. "Honestly, because Lily said I should. She told me you were sad, and maybe I could make you happy, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd tried to make anyone happy, including myself. You seemed like maybe you understood what it felt like to give up on yourself, and I thought maybe if I could do something kind for you, maybe I'd remember how to do something kind for myself too." "That's depressing," Emily said, but she was smiling. "It is," Daniel agreed. "But maybe we could try being less depressing together. Maybe we could remind each other that there's more to life than just surviving it." It should have been awkward, this first date built on shared pain and borrowed dresses. But instead, it felt like coming home to a place Emily hadn't known she'd been missing. They stayed at the restaurant until the wait staff started giving gentle hints that they'd like to close, and even then, Emily didn't want the evening to end. In the car on the way home, Daniel reached over and took her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for tonight. For taking a chance on someone who forgot how to do this." "Thank you," Emily replied. "For reminding me that I'm allowed to want nice things. That I deserve them." "Maybe you do," Daniel said firmly. "You absolutely do." When they reached Emily's apartment building, Daniel walked her to the door, and there was an awkward moment where neither of them quite knew how to say goodbye. Finally, Daniel leaned in and kissed her forehead, gentle and sweet. "Can I see you again?" "Yes," Emily breathed. "Please. Tomorrow? Lily wants to have dinner with you. If that's not too much." "I'd love that," Emily said, and realized she meant it completely. She watched Daniel walk back to his car, watched him turn and wave before getting in, and then she practically floated up the stairs to her apartment. For the first time in years, Emily went to bed feeling something other than exhausted. She felt hopeful. She felt alive. The problem started 3 days after their first date. On an ordinary Tuesday morning when Emily walked into the hospital break room to find her colleagues clustered around someone's phone, their voices low and conspiratorial. "That's definitely her," Jennifer was saying. "Look at the hair." "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. "I can't believe she didn't say anything." Emily poured herself coffee with slightly shaking hands, trying to pretend she didn't notice, but then Jennifer looked up and saw her. The guilt that flashed across her colleague's face told Emily everything she needed to know. "Emily," Jennifer said carefully, walking over with a strange expression. "So, you're dating Daniel Mitchell?" Emily's stomach dropped. "How do you?" Jennifer slid her phone across the break room table. On the screen was a photo, grainy but unmistakable, of Emily and Daniel outside the restaurant from their date. The headline read, "Tech CEO's New Romance. Billionaire Daniel Mitchell steps out with hospital nurse." Emily's hands trembled as she scrolled through the article. It wasn't cruel exactly, but it painted a picture she hated. The poor nurse, the wealthy rescuer. A modern Cinderella story built on inequality and pity. There were details about Daniel's net worth, about his company, about his deceased wife. And there were details about Emily, too. Information that made her feel violated and exposed. Her salary, which someone had clearly looked up. The neighborhood where she lived. A quote from an unnamed source calling her dedicated but struggling. "People are talking," Jennifer said, not unkindly. "Some of the staff think you're using him. Others think he's slumming. I don't think either, for what it's worth. But you should know what's being said." Emily spent the rest of her shift feeling eyes on her, hearing whispers that stopped when she walked by. By the time she got home, her phone was full of missed calls from Daniel, and a sick feeling had settled in her chest that wouldn't budge. She called him back from her apartment, standing by the window that overlooked the parking lot, watching a woman try to get her stroller through a broken gate. "Did you see the article?" Daniel asked immediately, his voice tight with frustration. "Yes. Emily, I'm so sorry. I should have thought about photographers. I should have warned you this might happen. I should have protected." "This was a mistake," Emily interrupted, the words coming out flat and hard, defensive because she hurt and didn't know any other way to process it. "I can't do this. I can't be that person. The poor girl who got lucky, the charity case. That's not what this is. Isn't it, though?" Emily's voice cracked. "You felt sorry for me. You heard me say I couldn't afford a dress, and you felt bad. And you decided to play hero. And I was stupid enough to let you. Stupid enough to think that someone like you could actually want someone like me for real reasons." "That's not true," Daniel said. And she could hear the frustration building in his voice. "Emily, please. Let's talk about this in person. Don't make decisions when you're upset. There's nothing to talk about. This was nice, but it's not real. We're from different worlds. And I was kidding myself thinking we could bridge that gap. You'll go back to your mansion and your company and your real life, and I'll go back to mine, and we'll both forget this ever happened." "Stop," Daniel said sharply. "Stop deciding what I think and feel. Stop assuming you know why I did this. Stop putting words in my mouth and walls between us before you've even given this a chance. I asked you out because when I saw you, I saw someone who reminded me that maybe life could be more than just going through motions. Not because I felt sorry for you, because I felt something, period, for the first time in 5 years." Emily pressed her hand against the cold window, her breath fogging the glass. Part of her wanted to believe him. Part of her was screaming that this was too good to be true, that people like her didn't get happy endings with men like Daniel Mitchell, that she was setting herself up for a pain she couldn't afford. "I need time to think," she said finally. "How much time?" "I don't know." The silence on the other end was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Daniel said quietly, "Okay. But Emily, you're worth so much more than you think you are. I wish you could see yourself the way Lily and I see you. I wish you believed you deserved good things, instead of assuming every kindness must have an ulterior motive." He hung up before she could respond, leaving Emily alone with her doubts and the lingering echo of words that sounded too much like the hope she'd learned not to trust. The next week was hell. The article had been picked up by several gossip sites, each one more invasive than the last. Someone tracked down Emily's sister at college and tried to interview her. A photographer showed up at the hospital, and security had to escort him out. Emily's colleagues alternated between pitying glances and barely concealed gossip, and she heard herself discussed in break rooms like she was a character in a television show rather than a real person. She threw herself into work with almost manic intensity, taking extra shifts, volunteering for the hardest cases. If she stayed busy enough, maybe she wouldn't have to think about Daniel's hurt voice on the phone, or the dress still hanging in her closet, or the way her apartment had felt a little less empty for a few brief days. Someone left a tabloid on her locker with a note. "Living the dream." Emily found it in the trash and tried to pretend it didn't hurt. But that night she cried in her car in the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes before she could drive home. What Emily didn't know was that Daniel was fighting his own battle. He'd called an emergency meeting with his company's PR team the morning after the article came out. They'd presented him with a strategy. Distance himself from the situation, let it blow over. Maybe release a statement saying it was just one date and nothing serious. Daniel had fired all of them on the spot. Then he'd called his lawyers, called his board of directors, and scheduled a press conference for Friday afternoon. When his chief operating officer tried to talk him out of it, suggesting that the optics might not be great, Daniel had looked at him with ice in his eyes and said, "Then get different optics, or get a different job." He spent Wednesday and Thursday working on what he'd say, rejecting draft after draft written by the new PR team, because none of them captured what he actually felt. Lily helped him, in her way, drawing pictures of him and Emily and her all together, like a family, which she taped to his office wall. "You love her, don't you, Daddy?" Lily asked on Thursday evening, climbing into his lap with her stuffed rabbit. Daniel hugged his daughter close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "I think I might, sweetheart. Is that okay?" "It's very okay," Lily said seriously. "Mommy would want you to be happy," she told me. In my dreams, whether that was true or just a 7-year-old's magical thinking, Daniel didn't know. But it made him feel better anyway, like maybe Rachel was somehow giving him permission to move forward, to take this leap, to risk his heart again. "She's sad too," Lily said. "Miss Emily. We should go see her. I don't think she wants to see me right now." "Sweetheart, then we have to show her," Lily said with the kind of confidence only children possess. "Show her that we're not scary. Show her that love is better than being safe and lonely." Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought. His 7-year-old daughter had somehow captured what he'd spent years running from. That safety was its own kind of prison, and the only way out was to risk getting hurt. Friday afternoon, Emily was restocking supplies in the pediatric wing when someone called her name. She turned to find Daniel standing in the hallway, Lily at his side, and every nurse in the vicinity suddenly very interested in their work. "What are you doing here?" Emily asked, acutely aware of the audience, of the way her heart was pounding, of how much she'd missed him in just 5 days. "I held a press conference an hour ago," Daniel said, walking toward her with determination. "I told every reporter in the city that the article about us was garbage, that you're not a charity case, or a gold digger, or any of the other horrible things people were implying. That you're the strongest, kindest, most remarkable person I've met in years, and any publication that suggests otherwise can expect to hear from my lawyers." Emily stared at him, speechless. Around them, she could hear the whispers growing, but for once, she didn't care. "I also told them," Daniel continued, now standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the determination in his green eyes, "that I'm falling for you, that it has nothing to do with money or pity or obligation, that when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to want something other than just getting through the day, that you make me laugh, that you make me feel, that you've somehow managed to crack through 5 years of carefully maintained emotional walls in a matter of days. And that if you'll have me, I'd like to take you on a second date, and a third, and as many as you'll allow." Daddy practiced in the car, Lily added helpfully, tugging on Emily's scrubs. "He was very nervous. He said the same speech to me 17 times. Emily felt tears burning in her eyes. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. Because you deserve to have someone stand up for you the way you stand up for everyone else. Because you deserve to be publicly defended and celebrated and protected. And because I meant every single word, every article, every gossip site, every random person with an opinion can say whatever they want. I know the truth. You're incredible. And I'd like the chance to spend enough time with you to discover all the other incredible things about you I haven't learned yet." "I'm scared," Emily whispered, aware that half the pediatric ward was now openly watching this drama unfold. "So am I," Daniel said, reaching out to gently cup her face with both hands, the gesture tender and possessive at once. Terrified, actually. I'm terrified of losing someone again, terrified of opening my heart and having it destroyed. But I think maybe being scared together is better than being safe and alone. And I think maybe you're worth the risk of getting hurt. Lily tugged on Emily's scrubs again, more insistently this time. Please say yes, Miss Emily. Daddy made me promise to be extra good if you come over for dinner. And I'm already extra good, so I'll have to be, like, super extra good, which is a lot of pressure. Emily laughed through her tears, a sound of pure relief and joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. You're already super extra good, sweetie. So you'll come? You'll give Daddy another chance? Emily looked from Lily's hopeful face to Daniel's vulnerable expression and felt something inside her finally relax. All her life, she'd been taught that she didn't deserve good things, that wanting anything for herself was selfish, that she should be grateful for whatever scraps life threw her way. But here was a man who'd stood in front of cameras and reporters and risked his reputation to defend her. Here was a little girl who looked at her like she hung the moon. Here was a chance at something real and beautiful and terrifying. Yes, Emily said, her voice steady and sure. Yes, I'll come. Yes to dinner. Yes to second chances. Yes, to all of it. Daniel's smile was like sunrise. And when he pulled her into a hug right there in the hospital hallway, Emily let herself sink into it. Let herself believe that, maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to have something good. The audience of nurses erupted into applause, and this time, Emily didn't feel embarrassed. She felt celebrated. She felt seen. She felt, for the first time in her adult life, like she mattered not because of what she could give to others, but simply because of who she was. Sarah was crying openly now, and even Jennifer looked moved. Someone started a slow clap, and soon the entire wing was clapping and cheering, and Emily found herself laughing, really laughing, her face pressed against Daniel's expensive suit, as Lily hugged both their legs. Is this real? Emily whispered against Daniel's chest. As real as it gets, Daniel whispered back, and I'm not going anywhere. The weeks that followed were not perfect, because real life never is. Emily still struggled with accepting help. Daniel still had moments where his grief over Rachel felt overwhelming. They had arguments, misunderstandings, moments where their different worlds collided in uncomfortable ways. But they worked through it, together. Daniel started leaving his office at reasonable hours, prioritizing dinner with Emily and Lily over late meetings. Emily slowly, painfully learned to accept gifts without feeling guilty, to believe that she deserved nice things, that wanting something for herself didn't make her selfish. They had a second date, and a third, and a 10th. Lily became Emily's shadow, following her around Daniel's enormous house, showing her every room and toy and secret hiding spot. Emily met Daniel's parents, who'd flown in from Florida and immediately adored her. Daniel met Emily's mother, whose dementia meant she didn't always remember who he was, and her sister, who cried and hugged Emily and whispered, "You deserve this." 3 months later, Daniel brought Lily to the hospital for her quarterly checkup. Emily was the attending nurse, as always, and she went through the examination with professional care while Lily chattered about her upcoming school play, where she'd been cast as a tree and was taking the role very seriously. "All done," Emily said finally, helping Lily down from the examination table. "Heart sounds perfect. Munchkin." "I know," Lily said confidently, "because I'm happy now. Happy hearts work better." "That's science." Emily and Daniel exchanged glances over Lily's head, both fighting smiles. "Actually," Daniel said casually, pulling his daughter into a conspiratorial huddle, "I was wondering if you could check my heart, too. I think something might be wrong with it." Emily raised an eyebrow, playing along. "Oh? What are the symptoms, Mr. Mitchell?" "Racing pulse whenever you walk into a room, difficulty breathing when you smile, obsessive thoughts about a certain nurse." He stepped closer, and Emily could see he was nervous despite the teasing tone. "A general feeling that my life isn't complete unless she's in it permanently. "Daddy," Lily whispered loudly, bouncing on her toes. "You're supposed to do it now." The thing. The question thing. Daniel shot his daughter a look of mock betrayal, but he was smiling as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Emily's heart stopped, her hand flying to her mouth as she realized what was happening. "Emily Carter," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, as he opened the box to reveal a ring that caught the fluorescent hospital lights and transformed them into something magical. "You've already agreed to be my first date. Would you consider being my last one too? Would you marry me? Would you help me raise Lily? Would you let me spend the rest of my life trying to give you even a fraction of the happiness you've given me?" Emily couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare at the ring, simple and beautiful, exactly what she would have chosen for herself if she'd dared to dream that big. She looked at Lily, bouncing with barely contained excitement. She looked at Daniel, this man who had seen past her defenses to the person underneath, who had chosen vulnerability when it would have been easier to stay closed off, who had stood up for her when she couldn't stand up for herself. "You're proposing in a hospital examination room," she managed finally. Her voice choked with emotion. "Where better?" Daniel said softly. "This is where we met, where everything started, where you made me believe in second chances, where you showed Lily what kindness looks like. This hospital is where you save people every day, Emily. It seems fitting that it's also where you saved me." "Say yes," Lily urged, grabbing Emily's hand. "Please, please, say yes. I already told my class you were going to be my new mom, and if you say no, I'll look like a liar." "Lily," Daniel said, but he was laughing. "What?" Lily said innocently. "It's true." Emily knelt down so she was eye level with Lily, taking both of the little girl's hands in hers. "If I say yes, you know what that means? It means I'll be around all the time. Like, every single day. Morning grumpiness, bedtime stories, helping with homework, the whole deal. Are you absolutely sure you're okay with that?" Lily threw her arms around Emily's neck so forcefully she nearly knocked her over. "I wished for it," she said, her voice muffled against Emily's shoulder. "Every night since Daddy took you to dinner, every shooting star, every birthday candle, every time I saw 11:11 on the clock. I wished for you to be my new mommy, because you're nice and you smell good, and you never talk to me like I'm stupid, and you make Daddy smile again." Emily held Lily close, feeling the little girl's heart beating against her chest, strong and healthy, and finally let herself believe she was worthy of this. All of it. The love, the family, the happily ever after she'd stopped believing existed outside of fairy tales. She stood up slowly, still holding Lily's hand, and faced Daniel. His eyes were bright, with unshed tears, and she realized hers were too. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong and sure. "To everything. To you, to Lily. To whatever comes next. Yes." Daniel's hands shook as he slid the ring onto her finger. And then he was kissing her, tender and desperate and full of promise, while Lily cheered and jumped around them like a tiny celebration all on her own. Somewhere in the hospital, someone dropped a tray with a spectacular crash. A monitor beeped persistently. Someone called for a nurse over the intercom. Life continued its normal rhythm, unconcerned with the small miracle happening in examination room 4. But for Emily, Daniel, and Lily, time had stopped. This moment, this perfect crystallization of everything they'd fought for and feared, and finally found the courage to reach for, would stay with them forever. When they finally pulled apart, Emily was laughing and crying at the same time. And Daniel was looking at her like she'd hung the moon and stars just for him. Lily squeezed between them, forcing a group hug, and announced, "We're going to be so happy. The happiest family in the whole world. I can feel it in my bones." "Is that more science?" Daniel asked, ruffling his daughter's hair. "Super science," Lily confirmed solemnly. "The most scientific science there is." As Emily stood there, sandwiched between these two people who had somehow become her whole world. She realized Lily was right. They were going to be happy. Not because Daniel was wealthy, or because Emily had finally gotten her fairy tale, but because they had chosen each other, chosen vulnerability over safety, chosen to believe that love was worth the risk of getting hurt. The dress had never mattered at all. What mattered was the courage to show up, to be seen, to let someone care. What mattered was believing, even when it felt impossible, that she deserved good things, that she was more than just a caretaker, more than just a paycheck, more than just someone who existed to make everyone else's lives easier. Emily had spent so many years believing she didn't deserve good things, that her value lay only in what she could give others. But Daniel saw her differently. He saw someone worth pursuing, worth cherishing, worth building a life with. And slowly, carefully, Emily was learning to see herself that way too. They left the hospital together that evening, a family now, bound not by blood but by choice and love, and the kind of hope that grows from roots planted deep. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and orange that looked almost fake in their beauty. And Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years. Joy. Not the small, fragile kind that disappears at the first sign of trouble, but the sturdy kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Daniel squeezed her hand, the ring feeling foreign and wonderful on her finger. Lily skipped ahead, already planning the wedding in elaborate detail that involved at least 17 flower girls and a cake the size of a car, and Emily smiled. This woman who had once believed her only role was to care for others, now learning to let herself be cared for in return. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. It was messy and complicated and sometimes scary, but it was theirs. And that made it perfect.